Good afternoon. We're with, how do you pronounce your first name? Elgin?
Elgin.
Elgin. Elgin. And your surname?
Long, L-O-N-G, Long.
And today is the 22nd, I believe.
I believe you're about right.
Yeah, the 22nd of March, 2018. And we're in Reno, Nevada, at the home of Elgin Long, in the library of, where you, in your gated community. What's the name of the gated community here?
This is Fleur de Lis. It's for Little French.
Little French, throw a little French into the mix. Elgin, we're gonna conduct an interview now about your participation in the operation in 1949 of bringing Yemenite Jews from Yemen to the newly born state of Israel in, what were the months of 1949?
January, February, March, and April.
So the War of Independence was still going on.
Yes.
Okay. But before we get to that, I want you to tell me about yourself, about where you were born, what kind of family you were born into, where you grew up, and we'll do a little bit of a background about you, please.
Okay. I was born in McMinnville, Oregon, and my family had lived there at that time for over 50 years already. And they'd came across the plains and wagons just like everybody else in those days. And it took 5 months to go from Independence, Missouri, all the way to settle in the Yamhill County in McMinnville. My birthday was August 12th, 1927, and my father had been a wheat farmer up until then, and he had decided that he was going to move over to the coast.
Yeah.
And so we moved to a place called Taft in Lincoln County, Oregon, on the coast of Oregon, where the Pacific Ocean was our playground. I was the youngest of 3 boys that were my mother and dad had, and the other 2 boys were 6.5 and 8 years older than I was. I was sort of an accident, I suppose. But I was quite a bit younger. My mother was a school teacher, and my dad was a wheat farmer and a store owner and a postmaster in Blaylock, Oregon, which is eastern Oregon up on the Columbia River. But I never knew that part of their life because I was born and we raised within a month and we made the Oregon coast. Very small town, about 300 population. My mother took the census in 1930, and I remember there was about 300 people in the whole area that we took the census for. But it was a wonderful place for a child to be raised. My mother, being a teacher, was a great advantage to me in that I was a very curious lad, and I wanted to read the funny papers, and my older brothers would read them, but I couldn't read them, and they wouldn't read them to me. So I wanted to learn how to read, and she taught me how to read when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And my life until I was about 10 years old was always on the coast. My playground was the beach and the bay. I learned all about logging. I learned all about, not learned all about, but I mean as a youngster I learned about logging. I learned about fishing, and I learned about hunting, and I learned about the ocean and the bay and the tides and things. It was a wonderful place just to grow up in.
Would you say that you came from a religious family?
My mother was very religious. My father was not particularly, but he went along with my mother's religion. My mother was a Christian Scientist, which was a faction of Christianity that believed the Bible interpretation was a science and health, and that it kind of translated the Bible into modern terminology, at least modern for 1930s.
Can you give me an example?
I'm sorry?
Can you give me an example?
We did not believe that medicine was necessary.
Okay.
I remember getting scratched or skinned up or whatnot in school. The kids would come and the teacher would put a little iodine on them. I was told not to use the iodine. It wasn't necessary.
So that, what's the name of the sect of the Christian?
It was Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of it. It was a woman founder, and it's called the Christian Science.
Christian Science.
And the newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, is quite well known throughout the world.
So you grew up with the Bible? Is
Yes.
that true?
Yes, I went to Sunday school every Sunday.
Old Testament, New Testament?
Yep. New and Old Testament.
New and Old, of course.
Yeah. But none of the boys. My mother became what they call a Christian Science practitioner, which would be the same as a rabbi or a leader in the church locally.
Or an imam?
And she was a natural teacher, and that appealed to her, and that's what she did.
So you were born on, you said August 12th, 1927?
Yes.
So you grew up, your early years, you grew up during the Depression.
Yes, I did. And I have great memories of the Depression from 1930 to about 1939. And it was very tough on the coast. On the coast, we could have people come in the summertime, but in the wintertime, you better put away some chestnuts in the corner of your mouth because you're going to have something to eat in the wintertime because there weren't any tourists then. It was a hard life, and my mother did 1,000 different things. She was a cook at a restaurant. She was the only bakery in town, and did whatever he could to make a few bucks. And my dad was a barber. He couldn't make enough money to keep the barber shop open, so he took our living room and built a wall, and half of the living room became a barber shop.
Unbelievable.
And it was very, very hard.
Were you, at a young age, were you active in the church or a youth movement or sports?
No, I never was really interested. I was interested in sports, and I was quite good at it for my age, but I was very young. We only lived there till I was 10.
What happened after 10? Where'd you guys go?
My folks decided that they had to leave the small community, and the kids. My brother was already graduated from high school, and he was working on the tugboats for the lumber companies, and then my other brother was finishing high school, and it was time that we moved to somewhere where they could have a better opportunity for prepare for their retirement. My mother was a cook, so she wanted to start a restaurant. My dad wanted his barber shop back, and we moved to a place called Marshfield at the time. And my mom and dad bought a piece of property, borrowed enough money to do it, and increased the value of the place. And my mother, we lived near the railroad yards, and so the railroad men needed a place to sleep during the night, so we took 3 bedrooms and turned them into a little kind of a hotel, especially for the railroad men. And my mother had to do all the sheets and pillowcases and everything every day for 3 men plus her family, and that was a lot of work in those days. Though she always had a washing machine. And finally they got the restaurant going, and Dad got the barber shop going.
What kind of restaurant was it?
And we lived in the back.
What kind of restaurant was it?
It was, they called it the Siberian.
Okay.
The reason they did that is because the fellow that owned it had something new that was very new in the world, and they called it soft ice cream. Now it's very common, but in those days everything used to be scooped up with hard ice cream. And the fellow that owned it was named Cy Berry, so he called it Siberian. And
so your mother didn't own the restaurant.
My mother run the restaurant.
She ran it.
She ran it. Well, she owned it. They owned the building, and they owned everything. Yes.
Now,
she was the cook, the waitress, cleaned up the messes, and took care of the customers.
In 1941, I'm skipping a little, but I'm getting.
Mm-hmm.
In 1941, you are 14 years old, correct?
I was 14 in August 41. Mm-hmm. And I'd skipped school a little bit. My mother being a teacher and I having interested in learning things, I skipped the first grade and went right into second grade. And so I was pretty far ahead in school for my age. And I was actually a freshman in high school, we had a junior high school that went to the 9th grade. I mean, a junior school. And I was, in September of 41, I went into my sophomore year in high school. A little ahead of myself.
So you were accelerated?
Yes.
Just a second.
And at that point in time in my life, I thought I would either be a tugboat man, like my brother, or I would be a logger, like all the people came in on Saturday night to get a haircut and a shave before they went to the bars. And or the only other option would be to work in the lumber mill. So I didn't see where college was doing me much, high school was doing me much good. And of course I didn't have enough money to go to college or anything. The family, we were still pretty poor during the recession. But then about 1939, business started to pick up, especially the logging and lumber business started to pick up because of the necessity of the war started in Europe in 1939, and Japan came along.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Hold on, I'm just going to do this again a little. All right, sorry about
Okay.
that. Sorry. 19, exactly. So I'm saying, where are you when you find out about Pearl Harbor?
I was
14 years old.
I was 14 years old, and it was when we heard about it on the radio. We were at the hotel downtown playing a pinball machine. And the radio in the hotel said about that, and everybody all of a sudden stopped doing whatever they're doing and listening to the radio. And I headed for a block down the street where the Coos Bay Times was, because I worked for the newspaper in the circulation department, putting papers together and whatnot, and getting them out. And they sent me out with 100 papers to a major intersection where there was a stop sign to sell papers. And they had a new extra about every 2 hours about what was happening at Pearl Harbor. And I probably I think I made 2 cents on every paper I sold, and I must have sold 300 or 400 of them during that day, standing out in the street. Everybody wanted to buy a paper.
Did you understand what was happening, though? Did it?
No, I got most of my information from the people that bought the papers. Remarks I can remember, they would pay me the nickel for the paper, and I'd hand them the paper, and they'd say, well, we'll take care of those guys in about 6 weeks. That was the that the Japanese didn't stand a chance. We would have them all wiped out inside of a couple, 3 weeks.
No clue that the Pacific Fleet has just been destroyed, but you know,
No.
I'm just stopping for a second because I realized. Okay, sorry about that.
That was December 7th, 1941, and it was a Sunday morning, and I was a sophomore in Marshfield High School at the time. And my brother was hired by the military to go to Alaska and run a tugboat up in the Aleutians. And the mills were very short of people. And even though I was only 14 years old, I managed to get a job working on the green chain, which is where usually you started in the lumber mill. You stack lumber that came down the chute that they, not chute, but the thing that brings the lumber out of the mill after it had been cut. And you'd stack it in different piles, 2x4s in one, 2x6s in another, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't work for the newspaper. I worked then for the mill, and I got union wages at 14 years old while I was going to college.
So I went to college.
No, I'm sorry,
high school.
Going to high school.
To high school.
And I, anyway, to just put it all in, my other brother was just finishing high school, and he was working as a longshoreman, and the job that you just couldn't get before because it was a strong union, and their union workers were the ones that got the work. But with the war, there was more work. They knew what to do. They didn't have enough people, so he got into the longshoremen's union.
What does that mean? Like that?
He loaded ships, unloaded, worked cranes, and things like that. And but he got drafted, or was going to be drafted, and he wanted to go into the Navy instead of the Army because we'd all been raised by the ocean, and so he joined the Navy.
This is your middle brother.
That's my middle brother, and I didn't see where school was doing me any good. Being 14 and coming up on 15, I knew everything by then.
Of course.
Of course, and my parents asked them I wanted to go into the Navy, and I went, well, you're not old enough. Well, you can sign for me that I'm old enough. I was pretty good size and pretty well grown by then, but I wasn't really wasn't 17 yet, which you're supposed to be. But my 15th birthday was coming up in a few weeks, and my folks thought, well, if we let him go in now, he would go where his brother, and his brother can take care of him. And so they let me go in the Navy. They signed that I was 17.
Really?
I was coming up on 17th birthday instead of my 15th. So I got tickets from the local military people that get on the train. We had a 7 o'clock train that left every night for Portland, and went to Portland, and there I took a physical, and on my birthday, August 12th, 1942, I took the oath and went into the Navy. And immediately got on another train and headed for San Diego for what we call boot camp.
How long was boot camp?
Boot camp was only about 6 weeks. I mean, they accelerated everything because they needed people out on the ships. And now started a series of events that I'll never be able to explain. I'll try. My commanding officer of the company that I was in was the chief petty officer named Mr. Mickety. And Mr. Mickety finally got 150 of us in our company lined up in some kind of military fashion. And he started asking us questions, and he said, all of you who can type, take one step forward. And I took one step forward, and I looked around, nobody else had stepped forward. So he made me the company yeoman. It was a break that I never would realize it any other way. Just absolutely was godsend to my future. So when the time came after the 6 weeks were up, he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a pilot. He said, no, you don't have the education, and you have to have 2 years of college to be a pilot. What else would you like? Well, I always liked radio. What do you mean? Well, I built little radios and put them together, and I liked amateur radio and was interested in it, and I was always interested in how radios work.
Amp radio, yeah.
And so he said, hey, here's an aviation radio school starting next Monday, just across the bay over at North Island.
Aviation radio?
Aviation radio. You can be in aviation radio too. Yeah, it sounded like a good idea to me. So he sent me to aviation radio school. And that started the Navy career. I went to a 3 months course in aviation radio, learned the code, and I was not very well trained, but I was apprentice seaman and a first class striker for aviation radio when I got out of the school. But they immediately sent me to right after the school was over, immediately went to a gunnery school, and I learned how to shoot a 50 caliber and 30 caliber machine guns.
On the boats, right?
Yeah.
Like the big guns.
Yeah.
With the tin cover.
Well, we didn't have those in the airplanes.
No, you didn't have them in the You didn't have them in the airplanes, but you had them. What?
We also learned how to run a turret that had twin 50 caliber machine guns in it, but only some of the newer airplanes had turrets in them. Most of ours were just. I flew in PBY-5As, which is a seaplane, and we had little bulbous windows on the side of it where the gun was mounted, and you were the observer looking out your side of the airplane.
These are wait, but first they put you on a boat, isn't that correct?
No.
No, they put you on aircrafts.
No, on aircraft. Went right on aircraft.
What kind of aircrafts?
The PBYs, which is a seaplane, two-engine seaplane. It was an airplane that was designed and built in the 1920s, and but it was a very good airplane. It was famous for taking off at 80 miles an hour, climbing at 80, cruising at 80, descending at 80, and landing at 80. That's about 80 knots is about all it could do. But it had a long range, and it could do patrols for 600 miles out in the ocean.
And these aircrafts have radio operators?
They had 2 radio operators, the first radio operator and a second. But we also, at that time, I was sent to another school. They wouldn't tell me what it was, but I was going to school, and I was there a couple days, and I found out there's something called radar, and it was our Navy had gotten radar for the PBYs built in Canada, and the U.S. hasn't into radar yet, so they trained me as to be able to work the radar and use it. And PBY is the first Navy airplanes that had them.
Are they like the old school AWACS? Are they like AWACS planes, but like?
Well, yeah, but on a very, very limited scale.
Yeah.
And so one radio operator would be on the radio, dit, and the other radio operator at that time would be on the radar. And you'd trade off back and forth.
And where do you do this course?
I did it all in North Island Naval Air Station, San Diego, California.
San Diego, California.
Yeah. And from there, I was transferred to San Francisco for 6 weeks for a transfer to somewhere in the Pacific. And we caught a ship out of San Francisco after being there about 6 weeks. and I went to Hawaii and to Oahu. I remember coming into Pearl Harbor. It was kind of cleaned up by then because it was about April of 1943. And I was sent over across the other side of the island to Kaneohe Naval Air Station, and I was put into headquarters squadron there, which was just transferring people to different squadrons as they needed. And while I was there, they sent me to an advanced aviation radio school. And I got my code speed up to 25 words a minute and learned a lot more about radio. And at the same time, there was a smaller airplane in a PBY called a Ventura that had about 9 people on it. And they had so many people on it, they couldn't hardly do any combat. So they decided that they would take some people and double up on them. And I was a radio operator, and so they thought they'd also make me a radar operator bombardier, because they had this radar good enough we could bomb with it. And they decided I'd also not only be the radio operator and occasionally the bombardier, which when you ever needed, but I could also be the navigator, because the radio operator was already trained in radio direction finding and knew about the compasses and this sort of thing. So they sent me to navigation school, and I learned to be a navigator. By now, though, I was a second-class petty officer. I made third class when I graduated from advanced radio school.
You're 17 years old?
No, I'm not even 17. I'm 16.
You're 16 years old.
16 years old. I'm already advanced that far. So I went, I was trained and ready to go to combat. We made a few...
Before that, there is one thing that I need to do.
Okay.
It's just an aesthetic thing.
All means.
Joshua. Okay.
So I was now trained.
So you're 16 years old and you're a second-class petty officer?
Yeah.
And you've just finished navigation course. You're a skilled aviation radio operator.
Yep.
Navigator, and you
Gunner.
are not even 17 years old.
No.
Is that correct?
No, I've got a lot of training, and still never been assigned to a squadron that was combat. You know what? I wasn't a second-class radio operator at that point. I was still third class. But I'd made third-class petty officer. I wasn't a second-class petty officer yet. And finally, I was, you want me to just start from there?
Continue.
Finally, headquarters squadron had trained me now I'd been there for almost 6 months. They assigned me to a squadron, and I was a second radio operator on PBY with VP-42. They had radar, one of the first squadrons that had radar. And VP-42 was a Black Cat outfit. We flew at night and day, and our planes were painted black and for night work and whatnot.
So is it more like reconnaissance?
We were strictly reconnaissance. Our job was to...
And now this is where, this is like from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor?
Now we leave Pearl Harbor and we fly to Canton Island out south of the equator. And we were stationed there and flew our patrols out of there. We flew our patrol to the Line Islands, which was Howland and Baker Island. Howland Island, by the way, was where Amelia Earhart was supposed to land in 1937, which was 5 years before. And you could still see the runways and everything then. And we flew crossed the patrols with the Japanese out of the Gilbert Islands, Tarawa and Macon. And we would spot them, and they would spot us. They had better airplanes than we did. They had 4-engine airplanes that were faster than ours, and they had 20-millimeter gun in the tail, and they could outshoot us and outrun us and whatever. But we were patrol planes. Our job was to gather information, not to go out and shoot people down.
Right.
So we waggle our wings and go our way, and they'd go their way, and we wouldn't actually do any combat until one of our gung-ho guys wanted to shoot one down. Anyway, he wasn't successful at it, but he sure got shot up himself, but he got back all right. We were on patrol one day, and I'll just tell you a little adventure. And I was sitting on the starboard side of the airplane.
As a navigator.
Well, I was a radio operator and radar operator in VP-42. They weren't operating the radar separately from the pilot, from the radio operator, doing both of them at the same time, listening and watching at the same time. He could do it. I was back doing a watch out of the blister on the side of the airplane that we could look out and see. And I'll be doggone if I didn't see a periscope slicing through the water. Well, we knew where all our ships were, so we were in an area where one of our was, so it was a Japanese.
You saw from the plane?
I saw it from the plane, yeah. We always flew our patrols at 1,200 feet. That was the best altitude. So I picked up the microphone. I said, I got a periscope 2 points back to starboard beam. And nothing happened, but the periscope was going behind us, and I kept going, leaning out of the airplane to keep it in sight. And my headphones cords was longer than my microphone cords, so I had to drop my microphone. And just as I got back there, and just about as far back as I go, one of the pilots said, "What was that?" And I don't have my microphone. Now I'll lose sight of the thing. Will I be able to find it again? And well, I got to go tell them what it is. And just then, I heard I think it was the navigator he said there was a periscope 2 points aft the starboard beam. And they immediately started right turn to the starboard. Well, as they came around, then I could see the periscope real good again. And he went around, got behind it, and came up back behind it, and dropped a depth charge on it. And I saw the bomb actually hit the water about 35 feet behind the periscope. It was a perfect drop right in the wake of it. So they must have got a thud, but it didn't go off. The bomb didn't go off. So we hung around for an hour or two, trying to maybe it would have to surface or something, but nothing happened. We couldn't find it again. So on the way back home, back to the Canton Island, he dropped the other bomb. It didn't go off either. Well, these are seaplanes, and we tied them up in the lagoon out at a buoy. Well, the salt water had corroded the propeller that when you drop the bomb, it pulls the wire out from the propeller turns and arms it. It was frozen, it couldn't arm. And so they checked the other airplane, they were all that way.
They're all rotten.
So,
all duds.
But I caught hell because the guy asked me why I didn't answer it. And I thought the best idea was just to be quiet.
And how long are you posted there for?
I'm sorry?
How long are you posted in this air base?
Oh, we were only there about 3 or 4 months, I think. And then we sent a military army group to Baker Island, which was only about 38 miles from Howland Island, and they built an airfield there that B-24s operated off of. That was getting preparation for Gilbert Island's invasion of Tarawa and whatnot. But we didn't know what was going on. We just hear scuttlebutt.
So this is, when did you become a pilot?
Oh, that was after the war.
That was after the war.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the whole war, you're
Radio man.
radio. You're a radio.
Radar bombardier, navigator. I never was official navigator on the airplane, but every navigator I ever had let me navigate anytime I wanted to. And I was very good at it. I got good at it. Anyway, we went back to Kaneohe, and they had been training their radio operators, VP-42, which I was in, and we were just temporarily filling in the places while they went to advanced radio school. And so we went back to Fleet Air Wing 2 Headquarters Squadron, and I worked in the radio shop then for about 3 or 4 months. And then I was finally assigned to VP 102, which was a 4-engine seaplane, Coronado, a big seaplane there. And we had 2 radio operators on. Yeah, 2 radio operators on it, or maybe there was 3, I can't remember exactly. And then I was second class. I made second class after my first 3 months down there. And
where as the war progresses.
okay, we went to Gilbert. We'd already got Tarawa, Macon, and the Gilbert Islands, and next was the Marshall Islands. And that was the commander of the naval forces in the Marshall Islands was a fellow, oh gosh, what is the name of the senator from Arizona that, oh yeah, McCain.
John McCain?
Yeah.
What about John
It was
McCain?
his grandfather, he was the naval officer in charge of the Marshall Island campaign. And we operated off of his ship, which was a Kelso, I think, or something like that. And we were in the Marshall campaign, the Kwajalein, and we went to Eniwetok Island, and we would do patrols out of both of them, looking for any incoming Japanese material and whatnot. I think we covered every Marshall Island there was at one time or another, flying.
This was hold on a second.
It was 4-engine seaplanes, PB2I3s. Those were Coronados.
Okay. So John McCain's grandfather was he was an admiral, wasn't he?
He
Or
was
his
an
father was an admiral.
he was an admiral at the time, I believe. Yes. And we were as long distance eyes. We patrolled out 600 miles in all directions, and make sure that no Japanese were sneaking up on us and whatnot. And we'd bomb Ponape and some of the other Japanese islands that we skipped a lot of islands. And
but throughout the war, you kept the same position as reconnaissance. You were in the same.
we would save our bombs until we were coming home, and then we'd always have a target opportunity at home. And usually out of Eniwetok, we were flying out of Perry Island, and we would bomb Ponape on the way back from our patrol.
Now, tell me, as the war is coming to a close, the Second World War, and the American forces are coming towards Japan, you know, there's Guam and, you know, the whole...
Saipan, I was in the Saipan Marianas group. We came back after about 6 months to the United States, and our airplanes we would do practice work with new equipment, and our airplanes was equipped with the latest, newest devices and new radar, because they were improving radar tremendously. And we would have our airplanes all brought back up to snuff again. Everything that we'd broken, they'd fix, and we'd take 3 or 4 months, and then we'd go back out again. And that time, we went back out with newer airplanes. They were PB2I-5s. And that's war. We went to Battle of the Philippine Sea, then we had the Okinawa, and I ended up the war at Okinawa.
Is that where you were when the war ended?
I was in Okinawa when the war ended. I had done some interesting work. During that time, we'd fly at night, and not using visual, we'd use our radar. And we did, in 1945, something that was almost unheard of, called radar countermeasure. And what we would do, the B-29s were coming in and bombing. And we would find out where the radar-controlled anti-aircraft guns were, which were the only ones that could really bother the B-29s. Yeah. And we'd have them avoid them, because we could pick up their radar signals and put it on an oscilloscope, and we could tell what kind of radar and what it was used for and where it was located. And we could also tell if they could see us or not, and by the strength of their signals. Anyway, if the Japanese had known what we were doing, they'd shut all the radar off. They'd been better off without it.
When the war ends, when it ends in the Pacific, mm-hmm. which is August 1945.
August 15th.
Where were you when the atomic bombs went off?
Okinawa.
You were in Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you find out about it?
We heard about it. We had radios. We could listen to Armed Forces Radio, or they call it now. We had
AFRTS.
Yeah.
Right, AFRTS, Armed
Yep.
Forces Radio. Yeah.
And the Japanese after Hiroshima did not give up, and so we bombed Nagasaki area, and they gave up then. And August 15th was a ceasefire day. And so we volunteered to go out to Taiwan, they called it Formosa in those days, and to find all the Japanese military bases we could find and to buzz them and see if they'd shoot at us. I'll never forget this one airfield we went down. We were about 10 feet off the runway, and this big seaplane lumbering along. And on the ramp, alongside, lined up on the ramp beside the air runway, are 5 Japanese twin-engine night fighters, Irvings we called them. And their engines were running, and the pilots were in a cockpit, and they were shaking their fists at us, but none of them took off to shoot us. But I remember saying to myself, boy, you gotta be young and foolish to be doing this.
When the war ends, do you get discharged from the Army?
Navy.
From the Navy, sorry.
No, we stayed, and we moved into Japan. And I believe we were probably the first Navy squadron that was based in Japan. And we were working off the Kenneth Whiting, which was a seaplane tender. And we went into Sasebo, and we were the first capital ship to go into Sasebo, which is a major naval base for the United States for the first decade or so after the war was over. Yeah. Yep. And we stayed there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd go over and buzz over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and nobody knew anything about radiation. We probably radiated the devil out of ourselves, but we didn't know what we were doing. And we moved from there up to Hong Kong, and we were at Hong Kong for about 3 months. I know we were there for Thanksgiving because still have the Thanksgiving Day menu for our ship at Kenneth Whiting in Hong Kong. And we draw shore patrol duty in Hong Kong and whatnot. Just make work because there really wasn't anything going on to do. And we'd fly a few patrols. But we had to, then we went to Manila in the Philippines. And I can't remember the name of the Naval Air Station there that they'd made, but I do remember right outside the main gate was a Bloody Bucket, which was our favorite bar. Oh. Anyway, by now I'm a first-class petty officer. I made first-class petty officer when I was in Okinawa, and I was 17 by then. I was old enough to be in the Navy.
And drinking.
Well,
just a little.
I'll never. The stories we could tell. No, we were a good outfit, and the Navy was good training.
When did you get discharged from the Navy?
I came back in January. I had 30 days leave, and I came back to Long Beach, California, to the naval station there, and I was discharged there on, I think it was January 6th of 1946. And I had a girlfriend that had been writing me letters and whatnot, and she met me at the gate, took a picture of me leaving the station with my discharge papers under her arm. And I got on a bus and went right across town and went right into UCLA. That's the University of California, Los Angeles. I had passed the GED test for high school and graduated from high school, and went right into UCLA. Not only did they pay all my tuition and all my costs.
GI Bill.
GI Bill.
Yeah.
And it was the most wonderful thing that could ever happen to anybody. I was only there 3 months, and in the meantime I got married, and my wife was going to have our first child, and I needed to go, so a friend came along. We were playing football out in the street in Los Angeles, and a friend came along with his new convertible with the top down. He said, "I'm going out flying Tiger Lines, hiring pilots. I'm going out and get a job. Would you watch my car while I go in the building?" And I said, "Sure." So we drove over to the Burbank Airport, which was on the other side of Los Angeles. And I watched his car. God, he was gone for about an hour, and I was getting thirsty, so I went in to get a drink of water. And as I was walking down the hall where I saw a water fountain, I heard code. And I went by a door, and I started copying the code, just like somebody was talking. And there was a bunch of people in there copying code, and the guy that was giving the code saw me at the door, and he motioned me to come in and sit down. So I sat down and copied it. I got hired. My friend didn't get hired, but I got hired as a radio operator for the Flying Tiger Line.
What's the Flying Tiger Line?
Flying Tiger Line were a group of the tigers from China that got together and decided that air freight was something that the world could need.
They're Chinese?
No, they were American volunteers. They called them the American Volunteer Group, the AVG. And they were in China for about the last year of the war, and helped Chiang Kai-shek keep his act together.
Basically, it's CIA.
Yeah, it's advanced that.
It wasn't
Yeah.
CIA. It was OC.
Well,
OSC?
it was basically the United States providing an Air Force.
Allies.
Yeah.
Its allies.
But they all had to join. They all had to quit the Navy and in the Army.
They're civilians.
They were civilians.
So you get hired by the, what are they called? The Tiger?
They call Flying Tigers.
Flying Tigers. So you
And-
get hired as a navigator.
I got hired
As an operator.
as a radio operator.
radio operator.
They got a military contract
I hear you. I hear you.
for 1 year, and the military supplied the airplanes, and we supplied the crews, and they flew between Japan and the United States via the islands, via Hawaii, Wake Island, and then to Tokyo. We did that for a year. In the meantime, I had qualified as a navigator. And they sent me to New York, and I was the only radio operator they had, because they only had one DC-4 once the military took all the airplanes back. And they were flying to Puerto Rico, so they didn't see any reason why I couldn't be navigator and radio operator at the same time. So they could have only one person do both. And so they hired me as a radio operator and a navigator, and I got my license as a navigator a little later than that, but they didn't have a license at that time. You just qualified, and I could qualify very well. So I was a navigator and radio operator flying to Puerto Rico, bringing Puerto Ricans into the United States.
Bringing Puerto Ricans?
Flying them up into the United States. Because it was a better life here than it was in Puerto Rico.
Was this sponsored by the United States?
Well, they were that territory at the time. Puerto Rico was
Still are.
yeah, and they could come to the United States, and so they and we needed people at that time because, well, let's face it,
Yeah.
Europe was destroyed. We had bombed every facility to manufacture anything they practically had. And Asia was not any better. And the United States had all of its factories going full time, all the trained people. And the people, yeah, and all you had, instead of making machine guns, make refrigerators.
You were doing this Puerto Rico, New York route for how
Yeah.
long?
Oh, for I guess about 6 or 8 months. And then the Tigers started flying across the Atlantic, and I was navigator then across the Atlantic. And I remember flying to Oslo, Norway, and they had a big banquet for us at the city hall because we were picking up the first crew that was going to come to the United States and pick up a victory ship and restart the Norwegian world as the best way to ship things. And that lasted for about a year. Then Flying Tiger Line didn't have enough business, and they were almost broke, and things weren't going well. They were using DC-3s to try freight, and they just couldn't charge enough money to carry enough weight to make it worthwhile. And somebody came along that had a lot of money and was going to help the Tiger boys, but he was going to put his people in charge as far as running the operation. They got C-46s, which would carry twice as much faster than a DC-3 and not cost much more, and made air freight at least almost profitable. I'm sorry?
What was the name of this company?
Flying Tiger Line.
Oh, still, but a different crew took over.
Yeah, no, still the same people, same pilots, same
But management.
management.
Yeah. Money.
A fellow by the name of Fred Benninger became our treasurer, and he handled all the money, and
So you're with the Flying Tigers. You're still with them at post-World War
Yeah,
II?
but I'd been furloughed, and I'd gone to work for 4 or 5 other companies anytime I could get a job. In fact, I would get calls somebody that's had a DC-4 that was going down to Puerto Rico and needed a navigator, radar operator.
So you were like a freelancer.
I just freelanced, you know.
Yeah, totally.
And so I worked for about 13 companies altogether, the different furloughs.
You got to pay the bills.
Yep.
You got
Anyway, it was great. It was great. Our child was born, and I was making enough money to go along with it. Then Flying Tiger Line decided to not do any more international work. They were just going to do the fly in the United States air freight. And they didn't need navigators or radio operators for that. So I got a job. The Berlin Airlift was just starting, and I got a job with Alaska Airlines in 1948. And I flew across the Atlantic out of
How did it work?
military field in
United States-
Massachusetts.
The United States government was paying Alaska Airlines to do.
Yes.
Yeah, they were chartering them.
Yeah, and this was about the same time that the Army was giving up the Army Air Corps, and it was becoming the U.S. Air Force.
Exactly.
And so things were.
So how long? So you joined Alaska Airlines when?
First part of 1948.
January.
Yeah, January, I believe. I'd have to look at my logbook to make sure.
And what can you tell
I
me?
was flying out of Air Force Base in Massachusetts to supply our nuclear forces that were stationed in Lakenheath, England. We had B-45 bombers there. This was our first jet bomber, the B-45. And we had them there, and we fly supplies, material, people back and forth between their headquarters in Westover, Massachusetts, to Lakenheath, England.
What about, how long are you a part of the Berlin Airlift? Tell me about that.
We started going to Lakenheath, offloading the people or offloading our load, and then we fly on down to maybe Erding, Germany, or Frankfurt, and pick up engines and whatnot that needed to go back to the factory for overhaul. And we'd fly them back to Texas, and then go back to Westover and start all over
You're
again.
doing some serious miles here.
I'm sorry?
You're doing some serious miles. This is a lot of miles.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of flying.
What can you tell me about the Berlin Airlift? What can
Well,
you tell
we
me?
didn't actually fly into Berlin.
But you were like,
We were back up, and we supplied them and kept bringing materials
you're
they
working
needed.
out for Alaska Airlines. Is
Yes,
that correct?
yes.
Which you eventually stayed with for a long time.
I'm sorry, I done
How
it.
long did you stay with Alaska?
Oh, I was with them for almost 2 years. Yeah, in fact, I was with them for 2 years.
Now, we're in 1948, right?
Yeah,
January, February 1948.
March, April.
Did you know about anything that's happening out in Palestine and Israel? Anything about the war of what's going on there? Or are you just...
Oh, we know what we saw from reading the newspapers and heard on the news,
yeah,
yes.
on the reels.
But none of us were flying there at all.
When does this whole, like you're, how long are you in Germany for? How long are you there for in Germany, backing up the Berlin Airlift?
Until the end of the year.
Till the end of
Yep.
1949.
Yep, till January
So
1949.
right before you come to Israel, you're in Germany.
Yes.
Tell me, from your recollection, from your memory, what is the first moment where somebody says to you, "We're going to Israel. We're going." Do you remember?
We were in Tokyo,
Okay.
and it was middle of January, if I remember correctly. No, it was the first part of January. It was one of my first trips to out of Payne Field. I was transferred from New York to Payne Field, Washington, And the reason for the transfer is that I was going to be a navigator flying on the Pacific instead of across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And so I started flying out of there in January, and my logbook shows the flights I was making. We were in Tokyo one time, and the captain got a cablegram from the company to go to Hong Kong. No explanation, just go to Hong Kong, and they told us to go to Kowloon, to the Peninsula Hotel, so they know where we're at. And we did. And we just sat there for a couple of weeks. We didn't know what was going on. So anyway, we finally got, I think it was John Thompson was the captain, brought another airplane in, and he got off and stayed in Hong Kong, and we flew up to Shanghai on the airplane and picked up a load of refugees, Jewish refugees that wanted to go to Israel.
What were they doing in Shanghai?
They'd lived there, but they were put into the Shanghai ghetto when the United States entered the war into Japan.
The Japanese made a ghetto for the Jews?
Yes. Japanese took all the Chinese that hadn't been there before 1937 and put them in this area of Shanghai that was, they weren't to leave that area.
But when you're in Shanghai, the ghetto's already open. The ghetto's open in 1948. The war's over. The ghetto, it's not a ghetto anymore.
Yeah.
But there's still Jews there.
Oh, yes. Still a lot of them. But there was a revolution going on inside of China at the time. There was a fellow named Mao Tse-tung, they called him.
Mao Zedong, the communists.
Yeah, the communists, and they were...
So your company cables you to go to Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Another plane comes to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
You have 2 planes from Air Alaska.
Yeah.
What are your orders?
They came to the captain. I didn't see him in particular at that time or whatnot.
Right.
He was in communications with the company. John, I'm sure it was John Thompson had made the first trip of them, and then when he got back to Hong Kong, he got off and he went to the hotel to stay for a week or two till we went to Shanghai, picked him up, and take them to Israel and come back to Hong Kong again. We come back to Hong Kong empty, or usually we were empty, not always. But anyway, the reason the Shanghai ghetto people wanted out of there was because the communists were coming towards Shanghai, and they'd had enough of being in the ghetto, and so they
feared.
Mr. Kaduri family organized this, and I believe was the financial people behind it. And the people were brought to the airport. As far as we knew, we had nothing to do with that part of it, and put them on the airplane. And our job was to somehow get them to Israel without going near any Arab country, and basically using British airfields, because the British would protect us. I mean, they wouldn't do anything. They'd refuel us and let us go. And we had to figure out some way to do that.
So when's the first time that you fly a mission to Israel?
It was middle of January, if I remember correctly.
Middle of January 1949.
1949, correct.
There was a war going on in Israel.
Yes, there was. And we were warned by the British, especially at Cormax or at Aden, that we should not, under any circumstances, land at any of the Arab countries that were at war with them, that we might survive as the crew members because of Americans, but the passengers wouldn't. And they advised us, if you have to land for some emergency fire or some reason you got to land, try and find a British ship in the Red Sea and land alongside it and ditch, and they'll rescue you. But don't, under any circumstances, land at a... So we had to figure out some way to get to Tel Aviv without going over enemy territory. So we'd take off and go up to Purim Island, which was British at the time, at the mouth of the Red Sea at the south end. And they had a homer there, and so we could do that. Then we go up the middle of the Red Sea till we get to the Negev. And when we got to the Negev, we would turn and go up the Gulf of Aqaba and stay in the middle of the Gulf of Aqaba. And we'd always take off just before, as daylight was breaking, just so enough light to see what we're doing once we leave the runway. But the sun hadn't had a chance to warm the temperature up, so we just barely could get off with our max gross weight out of the Kormaxer field.
Now, I have a question to ask you, and this is going to bring us back to the main topic that we're talking about. Why were you invited to Israel 2 weeks ago?
Well, because of what happened later. Actually, when we were there, we went up to Amsterdam, took some people up to Amsterdam, brought some people back. And I think the first time we landed in Nicosia, we didn't land at Lydda because the war was still on. Something, I a little confused there whether we landed the first time there or not. But I remember the second time, when the first time we came there, we couldn't get the tower on, we couldn't find any lights, but we found the airport, and the captain was able to land on the runway with his own landing lights, because evidently they were under threat of attack there. And the tower didn't answer or anybody or anything. They told us later, in fact, they told us at that time, next time we come in, you can call, but we won't answer. But if we answer, we'll answer one letter, any letter, G, K, L, anything. But if we answer L, X, don't land. If you any other letter, come on in, it's okay, you're on your own, but come on in. That was what we did whenever we were coming into Lydda after that. First time, we were met by we thought it was a follow-me Jeep that was going to take us to the ramp, but it was an armored car with a bunch of soldiers with guns on it that immediately surrounded the airplane and wanted to know who in the hell we were and what we were doing. We didn't file a flight plan or anything because we didn't want anybody to know we were flying up there.
When does this whole operation start with the Yemenite Jews? When does it?
Okay.
When like so you're flying these refugees from Shanghai.
Yeah.
To
we went back to Hong Kong again and Shanghai and repeated the process. The second time we came back, we were over Rush, Rush, just about the same time that they raised the ink flag.
Oh, really?
Almost within an hour of it, in one way or the other.
Before you guys landed there?
We didn't land there, no. We continued on up to Beersheba and then landed at Lydda. But about 4 o'clock, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something. Anyway, it was almost coordinated. We were at Rush Rush when the ink flag. However, we didn't know anything about it. And we landed there, and then we went back to Hong Kong. No. Yeah, we went back to Hong Kong again.
And you said that you got a cable from the...
No, I'm sorry.
Amsterdam.
Yeah, the second time I can't remember right now. I could tell off that whether it was first or second time off of Amsterdam. The second time.
Here, just so that you have it. Yeah,
That tell me quicker. I can find it in here too.
We also got this.
Okay. Okay, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Bangkok, Calcutta, Bombay, Aden, Nicosia. Okay, but I've got Lydda in there, and I don't know for sure whether we went to Lydda that time or directly to Nicosia. The second time was in February 18th, 22nd. Oh, we went to Amsterdam.
Yeah, that's when you told me that.
Yeah.
That's when you started to understand about the Yemenite Jews, and the head of the owner of your company was there, and he explained to you guys, or the general manager of of Air Alaska.
See, Lydda, Aden, Bombay. We went to Amsterdam, and then we stopped in Rome, we stopped in Nicosia, and we stopped in Lydda and Aden, and then we went to Bombay, we went on back to Calcutta, Singapore, and
It's okay, don't worry about it.
ended up in Hong Kong. The next time we left was March 1st. And we arrived in Lydda on March 12th. That's not right. Something's wrong here.
Okay.
Because March 12th we started the Yemenites. You're right. We came back from Amsterdam, and they got a cablegram. I would rather trust my book rather than my memory at this point in time.
I would.
Anyway, we got a cablegram from the company to stay there, to stay at Lydda. And a day or so later, we got another cablegram from Jimmy Wooten, I think it was directly from him, who was the president of the company. And I think he was in Paris at the time. I'm not certain of that. But anyway, he sent us a cablegram. Cablegram, of course, went to the captain, not to me. And we were told to go to go to Aden, to Kormaksar, and
Which is Yemen.
In Yemen, yes. And we would be met by the commanding officer at Yemen. And we were, when we landed at Kormaksar Royal Air Force Station, the commanding officer was, when we shut her down, was standing outside of the airplane waiting for us.
British?
British, he was, yeah.
And you have no idea what you guys are doing there? You're just going...
No, we didn't say what we were to do there.
So you get there.
And now comes the story that there had been other Alaska Airlines planes, but we didn't know anything about them. There had been 2 C-46s and 2 DC-4s that had come to Israel for the purpose of picking refugees up from various places and bringing them to Israel. The C-46s didn't work out very well. They didn't have enough fuel to, they were all right as long as they didn't lose an engine, but if they lost an engine, they wouldn't have enough fuel to get to they'd have to land in so they put extra tanks in them later on. They used them in some places. The 2 DC-4s couldn't get any gas, and they had an awful time. They made 4 or 5 trips of some kind, but I've never been able to determine just exactly what they were.
What happens when you get to Aden?
When we got to Aden, the commanding officer told the captain, and I was standing there as well as the mechanic was standing there, and he told the captain that we had some Jewish refugees that were in dire straits and needed to get to Israel as rapidly as possible. And the captain asking how many he had, and he said about 2,000, but more are arriving every day. But the problem is, they're arriving here. Some of them are sick. They have malaria. I mean, they're in bad shape. They haven't eaten properly in a month, maybe some of them. They were worn out. There were children. They couldn't take care of them, and they were living on the desert. And they got some tents for them, and that's all they could do. But in the hot desert sun down there on the coast, they couldn't. They didn't have enough water, and the military didn't have couldn't help them. They had to get them out and to get them to Israel. It was a matter of life, death. Some of them were dying every day. By the way, there are 600 tombstones not tombstones. There's 600 graves in Hashed, the people that didn't make it.
Of Jews who were at the airport, at the airstrip?
Yeah. Well, they weren't at the airstrip. They were at Hashed, which is not far from there, just a little. Anyway.
The situation.
So,
did you see these people? Did you see?
No, we weren't there at the time. We asked, he asked, how many can you take? And they said, well, we have 48 seats, but children under 2 can sit in their parents' laps. That would be legal. That has an effect later. Anyway, so, is that all you can carry? Yes, and it would take us a day or 2 to make each trip. Well, they're coming in faster than that. And the our mechanic at the time said, well,
yeah.
How much no, the mechanic said, well, maybe we could take more if we took out the seats. And Captain Curry said, well, how much do they weigh? And how much is their luggage? And he said, well, they don't have any luggage. They may have a Bible with them, their Torah with them, but that'd be about all. And some of them are half dressed, and they're desolate. And it is their life or death how many you get out of here. And they probably maybe weigh about 80 pounds each. They're not a big people. They're not a tall stature or anything either. And a lot of them are children. So 80 pounds would probably be a good guess. Well, we can carry 12,000 pounds and take off out of here in the morning and make it to Aden with enough fuel for emergency.
To Tel Aviv.
I'm sorry?
Make it to Tel Aviv.
Make it to Tel Aviv. Yeah, we called it Lydda. Anyway,
that was your first mission?
Yeah, that was the first.
Yemenite?
That's the first Yemenites we saw, and he said, "Well, could we try it? Let's see how many we can get on. I'll bring her at 5 o'clock in the morning for takeoff at 6."
Wait a sec.
Okay. Okay. It was March 10th
Wait a sec.
that we came in with our second. And that's when that all started. March 10th was when we went over Rashush. Am I sliding down in the chair a little?
No, these are okay. So we're
Okay. Now we go to the hotel over in Aden, and we come back and get there about 5 in the morning, and the commanding officer had 150 Yemenites there ready to get on the airplane. But they were having, we didn't have ramps, we just had a ladder. And they were, they didn't want to go because it was Sabbath. It happened to be a Saturday. And the rabbi explained to them that they'd gotten permission from the head rabbi that in Tel Aviv, that it's a matter of life and death, go for it. And then they didn't know about this airplane. And then he remembered Exodus, and he reminded them, hey, it's it's prophesied you're going to return on the wings of an eagle. Get on the eagle. And they started loading up. We got the first 140 on pretty good, but the last 10 took a little pushing.
Really?
Oh, the airplane was full. In fact, we had put a net up so they couldn't go to the back of the airplane because the airplane could lose control if they all decided to go to the back. So in order to keep them forward, we'd put a cargo net up and tied it up so they couldn't untie it. And they'd been advised, don't touch that net. You don't go back there.
And these people, did they look frightened? Did they look scared? What was your impression?
My impression was that, man, these people they really were in a bad way.
It wasn't like the refugees that you took from Shanghai.
No, those people they were a lot of fun. They still had a lot of, these people were desperate just to stay alive. And we sensed this. And so we got them on board, and it was getting just about ready.
This is the first mission.
First mission.
March
yep.
What?
March 12th.
1949.
1949.
And you fly from Aden
to Lydda.
How long is the flight approximately?
About 9 hours average.
9 hours.
Yeah. No, we didn't have any stewardesses.
Yeah,
no way to talk to them. Nobody knew the language.
Nothing. You just.
There. But they had the rabbi with them, and he seemed to be pretty knowledgeable.
If I'm gonna ask you now, how many missions from Aden to Lod Airport to Lydda,
yeah.
did you fly?
12.
12 missions.
Well, of the Yemenites.
Yemenites,
yes,
yeah.
12 Yemenites.
Yes.
And we carried 150 each time. That's 1,800.
How do you grew up reading the Bible, you grew up.
Yeah. Jonah and the whale.
Was there any biblical prophecies going through your mind at this time, or were you just doing your job?
We were just doing our job. No, I didn't know anything about Exodus 19:4 or anything that I know now. That it was prophesied that this would happen, that they would return on the wings of the eagle, and they would not fall and would not tire. But these people knew it. They knew their Torahs. Most of them knew most of it by heart. And when the rabbi reminded them that this was a prophecy, that this is how they would return to Israel on the wings of an eagle. And actually, the JDC and the Israeli government people must have known it too, because they named it on the eagle's wings.
Were you briefed about secrecy?
About secrecy?
Yeah.
It was a covert operation that was the United States, England, and Israel, and I think some parts of the United Nations was sponsoring. JDC was paying for it, at least as far as I know.
Defense
I'm sorry?
Council? Jewish Defense Council?
No, Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
So
That's
they chartered the planes from
Alaska Airlines.
Alaska Airlines. And how did the owner of Alaska Airlines get involved in this whole thing?
Through Jimmy Wooten.
Well, he's the man.
He was the president
of
of
the
the
company.
airline.
How did he get involved in this?
He made himself involved. He went to the Joint Distribution Committee. He went to the American Joint Jewish organization in New York, and his headquarters was in New York at that time. And he knew of them and went to them, and one thing led to another. Then he was working out of the Paris office. Wooten was a very unusual hustler, and he knew what needed to be done, and he knew where to go to get the help to get it done. And he was really the one that put this all together.
So your first flight from Aden to Tel Aviv is in March
March 12th.
1949. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you fly 12 missions.
That's correct.
Are the missions like back and forth intensively?
We made 7 trips to the following Saturday.
Every day, huh?
Every day, all day. And first, by the way, remember I mentioned that there was 4 airplanes from Alaska Airlines? Well, one of them crashed in Asmara. That's over in Africa. The British had taken over from the Italians.
Eritrea?
Yeah, in Eritrea.
One of the Alaska Airlines planes crashed.
Yeah, it crashed there.
On the way back?
No, it was just going back and forth between Asmara and Tel Aviv, and it was bringing 50-gallon drums of gas back and forth. They didn't have enough fuel for us at Cormaxer, so at Aden. So we had to go to Asmara to pick up gas, and then if I have full gas, then get there, they give us 400 gallons. That's all they'd give us. Well, that's all it took to get from Asmara to Aden. So we'd have our gas that we needed. But the airplane took off, lost an engine, almost made it around, but didn't quite make it. Hit a ditch and broke the airplane, in the back of the airplane.
How many people were on board?
They were just the crew and a couple of mechanics, I think, altogether, about 3 or 4 people. Nobody was badly hurt. Nobody was killed or anything like that. It was just carrying fuel, that's all it was doing. And then the 2 DC-4s, they couldn't get any gas. They were only carrying about I don't know how many they were carrying, but probably around 100. I don't know exactly how they did it, but they only made a couple, 3 trips is all they made.
So you did 12 of these trips
And
in about 2 weeks?
Yeah.
3 weeks?
We did. We flew 7 days straight, and we took a day off. And it was a Sabbath.
So
we were tired.
Yeah, I mean, you're flying.
Well, we were exhausted. We were really in bad shape. We knew we better quit, or we'd do something stupid.
Yeah.
And then we flew 5 more trips in April.
Now, the whole time that you're making these missions, and every time you come, you're landing in a dangerous area and you're flying to a dangerous area because there's a war going on in Israel.
Well, there was a ceasefire after March 10th.
Okay, so you guys were kind of like, up there you were okay in Israel.
As far as we were concerned, we never had any trouble. The movie script maybe makes up some trouble, but we didn't have any trouble.
So you're bringing about 180...
150 each trip.
Each trip.
12 trips, 1,800.
1,800.
Yeah. And we were, the one DC...
Is there one specific trip that you remember in particular? There's something that specifically happened?
Yeah. We didn't have any stewardesses. And I don't know whether it was a second trip or third trip. I can't remember exactly when it was. But we'd check every once in a while, check back there, make sure everything was going along okay, and usually it was. They were looks. The kids mostly were all ganged up, looking out the windows. They couldn't believe what they saw. Anyway, one time I went back to just check. All I did is open the door to B compartment, looked into the cabin. My God, a guy was heating tea with his stove right over the fuel tanks. We put a stop to that and made sure they understand no more tea, no more stoves. And after that, they put 2 Israeli stewardesses on board. They couldn't speak the exact language, but they could communicate all right.
Was there any, when you guys would go and land in Israel, was there anybody who would greet them from once they landed in Israel? Anybody from the government? That would greet them?
Oh yeah, they'd meet them, they have trucks there and everything, and carry them.
Take them away.
Yeah. Sometime in the middle of this, we had to stop and go up to Amsterdam and pick up the representatives of the Joint Distribution Committee, and because there was no KLM or anybody then. It was us. We were it or nothing. Yeah. And we made 12 trips, but I want to point out that we had no idea there was any other Alaska Airlines airplane within 5,000 miles of there.
But you didn't see them in Lydia? Or
no, there wasn't any. They left the day before, or a day and a half before we got there. They pulled the 2 DC-4s out to go back to get seats made so they could carry legally. We were doing this all illegally. Why? And it caused big trouble in the end.
Why was it illegal?
Because you got to have seats and seat belts for your passengers.
Hey,
but it's a matter of life or death.
The Israelis did it in 1985 with Ethiopians.
Yeah,
They had people sat on floors.
They had a 747 with 1,200 people on board.
Yeah. So
Operation, I can't remember the operation.
Yeah.
The one C-46 that was still there left, and the 2 DC-4s all left and went back to the States. And the reason they went back to the States, it was because they had to have the seats approved, and they used benches instead of seats.
Okay.
And they used ropes to tie the people down with. Stretched across 4. There was, instead of 2 on each side, there was 4 on each side. And they managed to carry 106 people legally. They were licensed for that.
You don't get stopped in the air by police traffic.
Well, here's the thing. The war has only been over a year or so, and international aviation is exploding. Well, Pan American World Airways figured they owned the Pacific and Asia, and TWA owned Europe and whatnot. Well, we were in their territory, and so they went to the CAB, and they finally they found out that we'd been carrying 150 people on a DC-4 without any seats or seat belts and whatnot. And they complained to the CA and CAB that we were flying illegally. And the company got fined, I believe. I don't know this is a fact because I had never seen the papers, but I believe they got fined $50,000. But the big thing was they were restricted to fly within the territory of Alaska. They couldn't fly international anymore.
And is that when it stopped for you guys?
Yeah. And the company didn't need navigators anymore, so I was out of a job. Luckily, there was another airline starting up, and they were just starting to fly the North Atlantic. They were called El Al. And I went to work for them as a navigator.
For El Al?
For El Al. I flew the second flight across the Atlantic, the revenue flight that El Al ever flew.
Wait a minute. You finish your 12 missions,
Yep.
and then they shut it down.
Well, we
Because
flew
you guys-
back home,
You flew back to the States.
back to Plainfield,
But
Washington.
you did spend time in, how long did you spend in Israel, like throughout that period? About 3 months?
Well, the first
March,
time we were there was February 8, let's see,
49.
February 22nd. No, wait a minute. About the February 20th was the first time.
That's when you were bringing the refugees from Shanghai.
Yes, and we were there. Last time we were there was March 14th. Nope, I'm wrong here. April. Wait, where in the hell am I here? March 17th. Lydda. Okay, here we're going home. We left there. We left there March. Here we were in April. That's when we left. Okay. We left Lydda April 14th, 1949.
Back to the States.
Yep.
So you were in Israel for about a month. A month and a half.
No, about 2 months.
2 months.
About 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
Yeah.
What do you remember of Israel?
Well, we never really saw much except the airport and the hotel, and we immediately went to sleep in the hotel when we got there and
Do you remember
slept.
the name of the hotel where you guys stayed? Just
I don't. I
Okay.
really don't.
Yeah, just-
I do remember when we came back. There's a little story for you. When we came back from Amsterdam with with the joint distribution people, they took us to the hotel with them, and we didn't stay at this little hotel there near the airport. We went and stayed at the Park Hotel in right on the beach. Okay, that's where the Joint Distribution Committee stayed, and they took us along with them. The captain wanted us to have a debriefing, so we all came to the captain's room, and he ordered some bottles of Heineken's for us. And we were used to paying for the large bottle of Heineken's. We were used to paying $3 or something for them, you know. And the captain could afford it. He was making much better money than we were. So he was treating us all to beer and debriefing and whatnot. And he ordered it from the waiter. Waiters were all in tuxedos and whatnot. It was an upscale hotel at that time, for us anyway. He came back with the beer, and I think there was 6 bottles, if I remember correctly. And the bill was about $80 or something. Well, this was wartime, you know, and you want your Heineken's, you're going to pay for it, and if it's in a tuxedo delivered and whatnot. And he asked if he could take half of them back.
And you know what the funny thing is? Israel's still the same way. It's crazy expensive.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I remember that the captain had a big gasp come out of him when he saw the bill. That's just a little light joke we did, but not serious.
Tell me about, I read an article that you were in Israel lately.
Did I foul things up by moving there?
No.
Okay.
Do what you want to do, and I will follow you. All about comfort. You were invited to Israel 3 weeks ago?
6 weeks
6
ago,
weeks
or
ago.
yeah, a couple of months ago.
Why were you invited to Israel?
Because I had been invited to come to New York to make some presentations for Stand With Us. And Shahar was the one who was
Presentation about what?
about the flights we did. It became known because of the book, and somehow the book got to Shahar's knowledge, and he checked it out, and it seemed to be true. So he thought it was an interesting bit of, because he was a Yemenite descent. He thought it was important, and New York would be interested in it. So he invited us to New York to make some presentations, and we were only there, I think, 3 or 4 days, something like that, and we were started out 9 in the morning, the radio, television.
Wait, is this in Israel or New York?
New York.
New York.
And we were very busy every day doing. Then a final, we had a presentation at the New York Jewish Museum. And everything was very successful, and it got a lot of attention for us and good publicity. And he contacted, I can't remember his name, I'm not good at names anymore, but he's head of the Jewish Yemenite group and has a museum there in Tel Aviv and whatnot, and contacted him, and through them and through Stand With Us and whatnot, they arranged for the whole thing. Also, Mark Siegel, whom you don't know, was also present and helped with the whole thing. They tried to get El Al to spring for a couple of seats, and El Al turned it down. And so I flew on Turkish Air over to Istanbul and then back over. And I don't know how good El Al is, but boy, that Turkish airline, I was only business class, I didn't go first class.
This is pretty good too.
Oh boy, it was the best business class I ever saw.
Tell me, you told me, so in your trip to Israel, I read that you visited, you were at a cemetery visiting a grave of
Wayne Peak. He was a pilot with the Flying Tiger airline. And by the way, when I got through with El Al, I went back and got my AAE degree in aeronautics at San Mateo College. Anyway, also, while I was at UCLA, I joined the Bruin Flying Club. And they had an airplane and a pilot, and they would instruct you, and you could rent the plane, and it was quite reasonable. And so I learned to fly and got my solo, and finally got my private license, and eventually got my multi-engine rating and instrument rating, and was qualified to be a co-pilot.
But who is this guy, Wayne?
Wayne Peak was a pilot, captain with the Flying Tiger line, and he was a junior captain, and I was a junior. I was hired by the Flying Tiger line as a co-pilot in 1952.
Right.
And I started then as a pilot, and he was a really good teacher, and we were flying an airplane called the C-46, which is a Curtiss Commando, and it was a great airplane to learn to fly. You learn to fly that airplane, no other airplane ever bothered you again, because it was you master that one, you knew how to fly airplanes.
With Wayne
Peak, and he was my captain much of the time, and he let me fly a lot, taught me a lot, and he got a bad heart, and he couldn't fly anymore. And he went to UCLA, and they had a medical center there, and they tried some experimental stuff on him, but he wasn't going to survive. And I'll never forget when he was telling me that, when I was visiting one time, that he was telling me that when they operated, they had a little portable radio they were listening to, and they forgot to take it out before but at least I'll die with a heart. It's with a song in my heart.
Why is he
was
buried in military?
he was on the 101 squadron. He was during the war in Israel. He shot down one of the British airplanes.
So he was a volunteer in
Yes.
48
Yes.
in the Israeli Air Force.
Yes.
Did you know? But you didn't know him then.
Oh yes. Oh no, did I know him then? No, I didn't know him then. I didn't meet him
Met him
till I
after.
got. Yeah.
And tell me, you told me that you worked for El Al?
I did. When,
Can you elaborate on that?
yes. When I was through with Alaska Airlines, my wife and my child, that was already born, was living in Los Angeles, and I was flying out of Payne Field up in Washington. I had to go back and forth. Payne Field is northern Washington, just north of Seattle. That's where Boeing has its headquarters now. Anyway, what I'm trying to get to is how I got to with El Al. Well, I lost
What year are we talking about?
1949, the end of 49. And the first part of 1950. I don't have it in here. I have it in the book. Anyway, I went to work for El Al, and Alaska Airlines laid me off because they didn't need navigators to fly inside of Alaska. And so I was out of a job, and I knew Bob McGuire, and he was, I believe at the time, he was East Coast Vice President of Operations for El Al on the East Coast. And I contacted him and told him I was out of a job, and I'd flown with McGuire a lot of times. And he told me, well, come on, I'm back in New York, and I'll put you on as navigator. And so I was in New York, and my first flight, I don't think it was the first flight, but I took the second flight across the Atlantic as navigator that El Al had ever flew. Revenue.
From where to where?
From New York to Shannon, Ireland, via Gander, Newfoundland. And then I hooked up with Lewis, Sam Lewis, who was El Al's chief pilot in London, I believe. And I flew a number of flights with him back and forth to New York after that.
How long did you work with El Al for?
Till about, until about September of 49.
So it's just a few months.
Yeah, just a few months, 6 or 8 or 9 months. I have it in the book here. I don't remember off the top of my head. But the reason I said September is because Flying Tiger Line won in 1952 in March. I went to work for them as a pilot.
I want to take you back. We're gonna end pretty soon, but I want to take you back to this 12-flight mission that you did.
Okay.
From Israel to Yemen, from Yemen back to Israel.
By Asmara, we always went
You
by.
guys always stopped, right?
Yeah, just for gas. That's all we were there.
You've flown a lot of places in the world. You've been all over the globe. At the time that you were doing this, did you feel the importance? Did you understand what you were doing, or
No.
you just did it?
No, we knew we knew it was something we had to do because these people were desperate. You know, you don't want to see somebody die when you could stop it, and they were going to die if we didn't get them out of there. And so we knew it was important, and that was more important than us getting sleep.
And 70 years later, all of a sudden, you're getting some sort of, I don't want to use the word acknowledgement, but you go to Israel and you go to the museum and you do.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, it was a real honor, And frankly, I was very surprised that the Yemenite people just were wonderful to us. I mean, they couldn't do enough for us. And they showed up by the hundreds at the time to change. And they danced for us, and they sung for us, and they showed us their museum, and it was just wonderful. And to think that 750,000 descendants of the Yemenite people that came from Yemen now in Israel, and we were able to help them get the first couple thousand out and set up kind of the way to do it legally. We set up the way to do it illegally.
Well, you guys were the first batch.
Well, I
With you guys, it was
think they made a few flights before us, but they didn't use these
And were
techniques.
you bound to secrecy at the time? Were you
Yes,
told not to talk about it?
absolute secrecy. It was a covert operation, and that covert operation lasted until January of 2016. Just 2 years ago, the last Yemenite covert flight operated. It operated all those years without anybody blowing the whistle on them. They had a name for it, and they gave the name out in January of 2016. There was only about 20 people that came back and they landed at Ben Gurion International Airport. And they were the last ones in Yemen that would leave. There was still, I think, 35 or 40 people that are still there that they just wouldn't leave for whatever reason. But yeah, and when you think about, well, somebody pointed out to us that there's a belief in Judaism, Hebrewism, that to save a life is worth 1,000 lives, or something to that effect. And to think that we saved almost 2,000 lives, 1,800 lives, and now there's 750,000 descendants. Yeah, it kind of blows you away in every regard, especially if you're my age and you know your time's limited. I'd like to show you a couple things.
Please.
Sometimes, and I don't know how well this will show up, but we'll try.
We're going to try, right?
By the
I have a good idea, actually. I'm going to
Okay.
stop the camera.